In this week's episode, Eddie continues to become his most magical, mystical, magnificent self. We're going to talk about the ley lines, beams, and we're going to catch up with our friend Jake. Welcome to Dark Tower YouTube, where we're doing a deep psychological dive into the magic, the mystery, and the metaphysics of Stephen King's magnum opus, The Dark Tower. My name is Michelle McEwen. I am your host, and I'm glad to be back with you. We're going to finish up chapter 29, 30, 31 of Bear and Bone and move into chapter 1 of the next section of the book called Key and Rose. This is all in book 1 of The Wastelands. Jake, not just a clever title as it turns out. We left our characters at the portal of the bear, and they were trying to figure out how they were going to get to the Dark Tower. This is that night, and we're going to join Eddie dreaming once again. King writes, in his dream that night, Eddie again went walking down 2nd Avenue toward Tom and Jerry's Artistic Deli on the corner of 2nd and 46th. He passed a record store, and the Rolling Stones boomed from the speakers. I see a red door and I want to paint it black. No colors anymore, I want them to turn black. I see the girls walk by dressed in their summer clothes. I have to turn my head until my darkness goes. He walked on, passing a store called Reflections of You, between 49th and 48th. He saw himself in one of the mirrors hanging in the display window. He thought he looked better than he had in years. Hair a little too long, but otherwise tanned and fit. The clothes, though, man. Square bear shit all the way. Blue blazer, white shirt, dark red tie, gray dress pants. He had never owned a yuppie from hell outfit like that in his life. We get the Rolling Stones here, back to our theme of doors and the idea of paint it black, black like the Dark Tower. We've got some darkness seeping into the story, wanting things to turn black. It fits. It's good. And then the outfit, which when we read this at the time, we have no idea why is Eddie dressed like that. This is his reflection looking back at him. But as soon as we move into the first chapter of Key and Rose, we realize, oh, that was the Piper School uniform. So Eddie is seeing Jake reflected back to him as him, which is deepening the mystical mystery of it all. Susanna wakes him from his dream as Roland cries out in his sleep looking for Jake. King writes, he was moaning some slurred phrase over and over again. After a few repetitions, Eddie realized it was the phrase he had spoken before keeling over in the clearing where Susanna had shot the bear. Go then, there are other worlds than these. He would fall silent for a moment, then call out the boy's name. Jake, where are you? Jake! The desolation and despair in his voice filled Eddie with horror. His arms stole around Susanna and he pulled her tight against him. He could feel her shivering, although the night was warm. The gunslinger rolled over. Starlight fell into his open eyes. Jake, where are you? He called to the night. Come back! Oh, Jesus, he's off again. What shall we do, Suze? I don't know. I just knew I couldn't listen to it anymore by myself. He sounds so far away from everything. Go then, the gunslinger murmured, rolling back onto his side and drawing his knees up once more. There are other worlds than these. He was silent for a moment. Then his chest hitched, and he loosed the boy's name in a long, blood-curdling cry. In the woods behind them, some large bird flew away in a dry whir of wings towards some less exciting part of the world. Do you forgive Roland yet? Are we still mad at him? Are we starting to have some empathy for him, saying, okay, it's enough punishment. He's dying inside from this. He is a different man than the one who uncoupled himself from Jake back in the Gunslinger. And Eddie and Susanna are right to feel nervous about this, and they are very aware that Roland is the fastest gun in the West, and there's all these weapons around, and his eyes are open when he's dreaming, so that's kind of creepy. What is he capable of were he to wake up and sleep shoot? They're moving on the next day. They put the portal at their back, and Susanna's like, well, how are we going to move in a straight line? Roland shows her a homemade compass, which is pretty cool, a little sewing needle and some water. And when they're on the path of the beam, the needle kind of like hones in and points the way. But Roland points out that they don't even need that, because the beam is redirecting everything in its path. So the magnetism, the force of that beam is just making things a little bit different and just giving everything a little bit of a different direction. King writes, now that Eddie had seen it, he could not unsee it. A dim aisle driving through the untidy tangle which surrounded the clearing. A straight-edge course that was the way of the beam. He was suddenly aware of how huge the force flowing around him, and probably right through him, like X-rays, must be, and had to control an urge to step away, either to the right or left. A little later, Roland tells them to look up. They did, and saw that the thin cirrus clouds had also picked up the herringbone pattern along the course of the beam. And those clouds within the alley of its power were flowing faster than those to either side. They were being pushed southeast, being pushed in the direction of the Dark Tower. So the beams are pretty cool, right? And I mentioned this when they came up the first time about how there are all kinds of imaginary lines around, and in spiritual, esoteric, metaphysical schools of thought, and that some of the important places of the world lie along these lines. Let's talk specifically about ley lines, because that's what I went and researched, but some pretty cool stuff came up. So we have this man in the 19th century in England called Alfred Watkins, who is an antiquarian, meaning he studies ancient civilizations and whatnot. He's a wealthy businessman, so I guess he has time and money to do these things, that sounds nice. And he's the one who came up with the term ley line. And he's saying there's this network of completely straight lines that cut through. When you draw these imaginary lines in England, it's cutting through very particular Roman ruins and special places and these kinds of things, towns. And he's like, that's not by accident. There's a power, there's a force here. He is arguing that these ancient alignments might be somehow oriented to sunrise and sunset, that there's some kind of a rhyme and reason to it all. But you can imagine that the scientists of the day were not impressed, and this was in part due to their belief that prehistoric Britons couldn't have been sophisticated enough to produce such accurate measurements about the land. Well, they were wrong about that. We've been so wrong about our belief that like we're so much smarter than people that lived thousands of years ago. And it turns out to be wrong almost every single time. So we should be learning by now when we're like, well, that's not possible because they were a bunch of dummies. That's not real. Anyway, they still were just like, we're not going to give him any kind of scientific credibility because he's a wacko. But there were people that agreed with him and thought it was cool, and so they made a little club of ley line finders, and he wrote a couple of books about it. He died in the 30s, and the club continued for a little bit, but kind of died out around World War II, and then formally disbanded in 1948. But the idea comes back when we have this counterculture happening in the 60s in England. And this archaeologist called Matthew Johnson says the ley lines were attributed with sacred significance or mystical power. Noting that in this period, ley lines, so in the hippy dippy period, ley lines came to be conceived as lines of power, the paths of some form of spiritual force or energy accessible to our ancient ancestors, but now lost to narrow-minded 20th century scientific thought. So that's cool. And that, I mean, you could say that's a definition of a beam, and I think it would be pretty good, pretty spot on. We're covering a lot of the same territory here. Now, people started writing books about ley lines again in the 60s, and this man called Tony Wedd published his idea that Watkins, the original guy, that the ley lines were both real and also serving as ancient markers to guide alien spacecraft that were visiting Earth. Wedd suggested that either spacecraft were following the prehistoric landmarks for guidance, or that both the leys and the spacecrafts were following a, quote, magnetic current flowing across the Earth. So there's that idea of magnetism. And we think about Stephen King writing It in a particular place that has a particular vibe to it. Seems like an evil kind of place. Does it have anything to do with being on a ley line? Fun to think about. So that guy's kind of alien ideas are taken up by another writer named John Mitchell, and he writes a book called The Flying Saucer Vision. In this book, he promotes that ancient astronaut beliefs that aliens had assisted humanity during prehistory when humans had worshipped these aliens as gods. But the aliens left when humanity became too materialistic and technology focused. He also argued that humanity's materialism was driving it to self-destruction, but that this could be prevented by reactivating the ancient centers, which would facilitate renewed contact with the aliens. So what? So that's like exactly what we were kind of talking about with the theory of Atlantis, and when Roland's talking about the great old ones destroyed themselves when they got too uppity about their technological prowess. So there's just a lot of overlap here. It's not like a one-to-one, but that would be stupid. But does Stephen King know about this stuff? Was he interested in reading about the ley lines in the 60s and the paths that the aliens would kind of hone in on? Sure, of course he was, the sci-fi master. So that's all cool. Okay, another cool thing I pulled out, same man, this Mitchell, writes another view called The View Over Atlantis. And here he starts interpreting the ley lines by referencing Chinese geomantic, I don't know what that means, energy lines. Cool shit, right? Cool cosmic metaphysical shit, which he transliterated as lung mai, meaning dragon veins. He proposed that an advanced ancient society that had once covered much of the world had established ley lines across the landscape to harness lung mai energy. So there's this idea of that they existed already. They were already there, and then man came along and created ley lines that harnessed that energy of that the natural energy, the natural magic of that space. And that's saying how lay hunters, so there's people out there that are like, yeah, this is cool, we're into this, and we're going to find these places, often differed on how they understood the ley lines. Some believed that lays only marked a pre-existing energy current, where others thought that the lays helped to control and direct that energy. There's the same idea. So, and Roland wasn't really sure. We don't know in the wastelands what's happening with the beams. They're man-made, but to do what? And is it coming from the Dark Tower, going to the Dark Tower, using something that was already there in the natural world? But this is a very similarly themed thing. Nevertheless, there's an agreement amongst these folks that the ley lines were laid out between 5000 BC and 2600 BC, after the introduction of agriculture, but before the introduction of metal in Britain. And there's more to that story, but it goes pretty much how you think it would. They're still around today, the ley hunters, the ley line people, and still the scientists saying, that's not real, stop talking about it. But Roland, I think, would be a ley hunter in another life. Right, so they're going to set off on their way to the Dark Tower. But before they do, there's one more thing that Roland needs to do before they go. And he takes off his gun and he hands it to Eddie. He's aware that when he's not in his right mind, he is an extremely dangerous person, given who he is. Eddie's very reluctant to take it. He's like, no way, no way, man. But Roland insists, and he's just standing there with the gun out, like, I'll stand here until I die or you take the gun. King writes. He snatched the gun belt from Roland's hand and buckled it about his own waist in a series of rough gestures. He should have been relieved, he supposed. Hadn't he looked at this gun, lying so close to Roland's hand in the middle of the night, and thought about what might happen if Roland really did go over the high side? Hadn't he and Susanna both thought about it? But there was no relief, only fear and guilt and a strange aching sadness far too deep for tears. He looked so strange without his guns, so wrong. Okay, now that the numb fuck apprentices have the guns and the master's unarmed, can we please go? If something big comes out at the bush at us, Roland, you can always throw your knife at it. Oh, that, he murmured. I almost forgot. He took the knife from his purse and held it out, hilt first, to Eddie. This is ridiculous, Eddie shouted. Life is ridiculous. Yeah, put it on a postcard and send it to the fucking Reader's Digest. Eddie jammed the knife into his belt and then looked defiantly at Roland. Now can we go? There is one more thing, Roland said. Weepin' creepin' Jesus! The smile touched Roland's mouth again. Just joking, he said. Eddie's mouth dropped open. Beside him, Susanna began to laugh again. The sound rose, as musical as bells in the morning stillness. I pull this out because I want to have empathy for Roland again and just say, hey, like, he's not so arrogant and full of himself that he's going to keep his weapons while he knows that he's losing his mind. He trusts these people. So just like he trusted Susanna with his gun, now he's trusting Eddie with his other gun. He's given both of his guns to his apprentices. That's big. And then he gives his knife. He's completely unarmed with these two friends. So that's cool. The other thing is that he makes a joke, which Roland doesn't do that often. And given the circumstances where he's in a really bad place, such a bad place that he's giving his weapons away because he doesn't even trust himself anymore. with his new friends, he can smile and laugh. They can help each other out in these times of darkness. And that's what friends are for. We've got friends, and then we've got our real friends. We've got our quartet friends. When things are real bad, that's who we're going to talk to. And sometimes they can make a joke despite it all and make us laugh, or at least help shift us out of a particularly gnarly mindset. So I just love that we're seeing Roland doing this with friends. We haven't seen him like this. And I didn't read the whole thing to you, but notice how it's saying, smile touched Roland's mouth again. Susanna began to laugh again. This is a recurrent theme now. So I love that for Roland. Come what may, he is living and loving and laughing again. And so they start walking to the Dark Tower. I mean, they're just going to follow the path of the beam and walk to the tower, right? There's only 5 more books left. What else could possibly happen? As they're walking, Eddie sees another shape in a tree. And he has that feeling about, I need to carve that inner voice now that's speaking to him. But the other inner voice of Henry, of embarrassment and shame, we notice is still there and is still making Eddie have some hesitation about it. And that makes us a little sad. But he does take the piece of wood, and he thinks it's the key that he saw in the fire, that he knew. He couldn't forget the shape of that key. So now he's going to carve it. So that night he's going to start carving. And Roland's still having his battling inner voices about Jake. And that's where we're leaving everybody at the end of Bear and Bone section. So quick little roundup there. We're leaving Eddie, whom we met in the last book as just a junkie that was probably going to die in a couple of weeks, if that, to this amazing, resourceful, strong, mystical man who just is living his best life now and is a gunslinger. We have Susanna coming into the story at the beginning of this section. She just effortlessly fits in with this group. It doesn't feel weird. It doesn't feel clunky. Sometimes when you watch a TV show and they bring a new character in, it's like, oh, I don't like this person. It's weird. I just wanted it like it was before. I don't have any of that with Susanna. I would love to hear your thoughts if you're enjoying her or if you just feel like she just naturally belongs there. It's just such an effortless, easy fit with her in this group. Eddie is now in this place also where he's like, he's dreaming of the tower. He would not go back to New York City given the chance until he sees the tower. He's all in. But we don't get any of that with Susanna. I don't think she's even talked about the tower or thought about it. Not that we've been shown by King. What he is showing us about her is that she's very focused on safety and empathy and care and love. So she's having her shooting lesson, but the moment that she thinks Eddie is in trouble, that's it. That's her whole world. We have to protect him. And then Roland giving her the lesson where she's very deeply hurt by his teaching methods. But the moment that he starts to have his episode of insanity, she's like, oh my gosh, we have to help you. What's wrong? Just the care, the Odetta side of her kind of coming out and just loving and caring for these men and not really focused on the tower. Is she just kind of along for the ride? We don't really know, but that trait has been shown to us and not her lust for the tower like these other 2 men. So we're going to pay attention to all of those things. They are both gunslingers. They're both good at this. Naturally, preternaturally good. Is that the right word? And they both are kind of like, no, I'm not, Roland. But deep down, they both have that inner voice saying, Susanna's was out loud. She says, I hope I never have to do anything like that again. she said, but a small voice at the center of her demurred. That voice suggested that she could not wait to do something like that again. And it was cold, that voice, cold. And of course, Eddie has the same thing where he enjoyed. He's all mad at Roland after the shootout problem with the rat and all of that. But he says his heart knew other things when he's telling them, I don't want to be a gunslinger. His heart knew other things. So I love the way King writes that. He enjoyed shooting them. He enjoyed kicking the rat. And King writes, in some weird way, that part, the being scared part, actually seemed to add to the enjoyment. So we have fear and anger and hurt kind of all wrapped up with gunslingerness, coldness. Roland's in need of help at the end of this section, and we can just kind of say that happened in book 1 and 2 as well. He was left physically needing in book 1, and Jake saved his life, physically needing in book 2, and Eddie saved his life. And now he's healed physically. We're told that at the start of this book, but mentally he's in dire need of saving. Who is going to save him now? And with that, we move on to section 2 of book 1 of The Wastelands, Key and Rose. When you read this, the first paragraph, and you saw the name Jake Chambers, was your mind blown? I remember reading this for the first time and just doing a little inner dance of joy that Jake was back, that we were not just abandoning him down in the trench in the mountain, that we get to see what he's doing and what he's up to, and what does he have to do with our story now? Where is this going? So super excited to see Jake again. Except we learned that he's been going insane for the last 3 weeks, because that's when he would have been pushed in front of the car, but he wasn't, because Jack Mort is no longer in existence. So from that moment, his mind is arguing, you're alive, you're dead. So Roland's mind is arguing, there was a boy, there wasn't a boy, and Jake is, I'm dead, I'm alive, which is probably worse, like Roland pointed out in the last episode that we did. Let's read the opening paragraph of this section and pay attention. We're going to pay attention to the imagery King is using. King writes, for 3 weeks, John, Jake Chambers, fought bravely against the madness rising inside him. During that time, he felt like the last man aboard a foundering ocean liner, working the bilge pumps for dear life, trying to keep the ship afloat until the storm ended, the sky cleared, and help could arrive. Help from somewhere. Help from anywhere. On May 31st, 1977, 4 days before school ended for the summer, he finally faced up to the fact that no one was going to come. It was time to give up. Time to let the storm carry him away. So this is hearkening back to the gunslinger and our imagery of the Phoenician sailor. Remember that? And at the time, I believe I pointed out that the Phoenician sailor was not a real tarot card when the man in black pulled it. And then we remember in the drawing of the 3, Roland is having dreams of a drowning Jake, similar to the imagery in that card in the beginning of the drawing of the 3, the prologue, I believe. I think it's cool to talk about it now, though, because it's going to hit a little harder when we look at where this comes from. The idea of the Phoenician sailor, not a real tarot card, a tarot card invented by T.S. Eliot in his poem, The Wasteland. Here is the few lines that comes from. T.S. Eliot writes, Madame Sosotris, famous clairvoyant, had a bad cold. Nevertheless, is known to be the wisest woman in Europe, with a wicked pack of cards. Here, she said, is your card, the drowned Phoenician sailor. Those are pearls that were his eyes. Look. So that's the wastelands. And we have that parallel between a clairvoyant tarot card reading person pulling that card in his poem and the man in black drawing that card in Roland's tarot reading. So already King having the wasteland and T.S. Eliot on his mind all the way back in The Gunslinger. And that's even in the original Gunslinger back from the 70s. What does it mean? It's just pretty cool that we're in this meta space where the imagery and actual goings-ons in our story are reflections of another story from a different time, place, space. I love it. Jake is 11. He's finishing the 6th grade, but he looks small. And he's even been mistaken for a girl. King writes, in fact, he had sometimes been mistaken for a girl until a year or so ago, when he had made such a fuss about having his hair cut short that his mother had finally relented and allowed it. With his father, of course, there had been no problem about the haircut. His father had just grinned his hard, stainless steel grin and said, "The kid wants to look like a Marine, Laurie. Good for him." To his father, he was never Jake and rarely John. To his father, he was usually just the kid. We learned that Jake's dad likes to brag to anyone who will listen about how Jake got into the Piper School, what his dad calls the best damn school in the country for a boy his age, through his smarts alone. King writes, "The only thing that gets you into a place like Piper is what you've got up here." Elmer Chambers had reached over his desk and tapped the center of his son's forehead with a hard, nicotine-stained finger. "Get me, kid?" Jake had nodded. It wasn't necessary to talk to his father, because his father treated everyone, including his wife, the way he treated his underlings at the TV network, where he was in charge of programming and an acknowledged master of the kill. All you had to do was listen, nod in the right places, and after a while, he let you go. "Good," his father said, lighting one of the 80 Camel cigarettes he smoked each and every day. We met Elmer Chambers back in The Gunslinger, so I want to refresh our memory because there's a few things that King is repeating here, and we always pay attention when King tells us something more than once. So this was from The Gunslinger. King writes, "His father makes a great deal of money because he is a master of the kill. That is, placing a stronger show on his network against a weaker show on a rival network. His father smokes 4 packs of cigarettes a day. His father does not cough, but he has a hard grin, and he's not averse to the occasional shot of the old Coca-Cola." So we have some similarities between Elmer Chambers and Roland that I'd like to point out. We're told twice that he is a master of the kill. Is that not exactly what Roland is? We're just talking about different set of dogs, but same skill set, really. So they're both masters of the kill in their own way. Roland doesn't smoke 4 packs of cigarettes a day, but would he if he had them? I think he would. He just has to treasure that tobacco because it's a little harder to come by in his world. But I believe he would smoke them if he had them. And would he pick the Camel brand? The desert imagery there? Would that appeal to him? Perhaps. How about the hard grin that we're told about twice? The hard grin, the steel grin, that is also something that we know about Roland. Even I think the tapping the kid on the forehead, that feels like something that Roland might do, doesn't seem out of place for him. Elmer Chambers calls Jake the kid, and Roland Deschain calls Jake the boy. At least he did in The Gunslinger. There are some other similarities that will come up that are striking, but we're not there yet, so I'm not going to spoil it for you. But you can see when you get there now. I want you to be paying attention when we're told things about Jake's father, and I want you to look for those similarities because they're for sure there. The name Elmer. Here's another similarity. The name Elmer means noble or famous or renowned. I want us to remember back to a bonus episode that I did. Did you watch my bonus episode about the origins of Roland of Gilead? Well, you should, because it's fantastic. And I talk all about where did Roland come from in mythology, and what does the name Deschain mean, and what does the name Roland mean for that matter. What we learned was that Roland means from the famous land or fame of the land. Okay, again, Elmer means noble and famous. Yep. It's all there, kids. Let's talk about Jake's mother, Laurie. And I want to dip back into The Gunslinger, where we are first told about her. His mother, who is scrawny in a sexy way, often goes to bed with sick friends. And then later in this book, oh, you know what? We didn't get there yet. We didn't get there yet, so I'm not going to say it. But I'm going to say it when we get there. Okay, but there is a parallel. Now, we don't have to get there. You're going to see it when you get there. Who also goes to bed with people she shouldn't go to bed with? Who else is having an affair? Okay. The name Laurie means laurel or bay laurel, which represents victory and honor. And we'll remember that the name Gabrielle means mighty woman of God. So we have victory and honor, mighty woman of God. I don't know. It's not as straightforward as the Elmer Roland thing. It's close, though. It's close. But definitely sleeping with the sick friends. We're going to keep an eye out for anything else we hear about Jake's mother and thinking about Gabrielle Deschain. Next, let us consider similarities between Jake's New York City life and Gilead. So we weren't shown what Roland's academic schooling looked like. We got some glimpses of his gunslinger training and were told about some of his academic studies, but weren't really given a snapshot into it the way that we're given this description by King about what Jake is living in, his academic life. I think that the Piper School, the things that we're being told about the Piper School would definitely fit into the world of Gilead. King writes, Mr. Bissett headed toward the row of seats called Faculty Choir. There were lots of cute names like that at Piper School. The auditorium was the Common Room. Lunch hour was Outs. 7th and 8th graders were upper boys and girls, and of course, the folding chairs over by the piano, which Miss Franks would soon begin to pound as mercilessly as she rang her silver bell, was faculty choir. All part of the tradition, Jake supposed. If we are ever given a flashback into a Gilead school, faculty choir, common room, outs, ringing the bell, those things would fit right in. Don't you think so? As we watch Jake moving through his school day, we get a glimpse into his madness, which looks much like Roland's in the voices arguing over whether he died or he didn't die. King writes, he slipped into a seat at the rear of the room and let the morning's announcements wash over him. The terror ran endlessly on in his mind, making him feel like a rat trapped on an exercise wheel. And when he tried to look ahead to some better, brighter time, he could only see darkness. The ship was his sanity, and it was sinking. There's that ocean and drowning imagery yet again, and the idea of darkness coming in. So we had the Rolling Stones song, I have to turn my head before my darkness grows. Of course, the Dark Tower, the darkness. Later in this section, King is talking about Jake sitting in the auditorium and not singing the school song. Jake mouthed the words and thought about the place where he had awakened after dying. At first, he had believed himself to be in hell, and when the man in the black hooded robe came along, he had been sure of it. Then, of course, the other man had come along. A man Jake had almost come to love. But he let me fall. He killed me. It's so sad. So Jake is having a split mind about being alive and dead. But he's also split about loving Roland. Notice he said a man Jake had almost come to love. And remember last episode we talked about how Roland finally used the word, I killed him. I killed him under the mountains. I think this is a nice echo of that. He let me fall. He killed me. So a parallel between those two characters. And we're going to end it there because we're going to move into the final essay and what he wrote. And I did such a deep dive that I think it's its own episode. So I have to figure out, I'm going to make that episode all on its own. Jake's final essay. And I'll talk a little bit about it in the next episode of this show that we're doing. But just know that there's going to be a whole expanded director's cut version. There's so much in that essay. So that's where we're going to pick back up next time. I am in love with the wastelands. And I can't wait to be back with y'all and talk about what's going on with Jake and what does this have to do with Roland and Eddie and Susanna. We shall find out. Stay tuned to Dark Tower YouTube. Until we meet again, my beautiful hearts of darkness friends, may you have long days and pleasant nights.